Today's lecture is the first in a series on muscle. And of course, we're going to start with an overview of skeletal muscles. Then we're going to talk about the actual muscle cells, then the myofibrils within those cells, and then a follow-up lecture will be on how do these cells actually contract? How does a myofibril contract? And then we're going to talk about, my last lectures will be on the role or the effects of exercise on our muscles. Like how does weightlifting and cardio affect muscles? And not only that, how does it affect our overall health as well? But before we get started, in today's lecture, we're going to talk about an overview of skeletal muscles. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is go over all the different parts of the muscles, or I should say all the different types of muscles, or all the different muscles like the bicep, the tricep, the deltoid, the pec. No, what I'm going to focus on is just the general structure of skeletal muscles. So when we look at a skeletal muscle, like a bicep, right here, our bicep, okay, it's got lots of blood vessels. That makes sense. Blood vessels are metabolically active. They need a lot of glucose. And to break down that glucose and get energy from it through cellular respiration, you need lots of oxygen. So blood vessels supply the energy that muscles need in terms of the glucose and the oxygen to use that glucose. And of course, if you're metabolically active, you're creating lots of waste, including carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste that has to be removed from your muscles. Now, our skeletal muscles are under voluntary control. You can see me hand waving here. I'm controlling that motion, and basically our muscles are coordinated by our nervous system. So muscles are innervated. And of course, our muscles connect to bones so we can have movement. And our muscles are also connected to each other. So there's lots of connective tissue holding the muscles together and attaching them to other structures, including bones. Skeletal muscles also include various other elements like muscle fascia, like the epimysium, the paramysium, the endomysium, and they're also made up of fascicles and muscle fibers. Let's take a closer look. Okay, a muscle fiber, that is also a muscle cell, also a myocyte. So we can use myocyte, muscle cell, muscle fiber, and use those words interchangeably. I will probably just call them muscle fibers because they're long and fibrous, hence the name fiber. Now, each muscle fiber is surrounded by the endomysium. This is part of the extracellular matrix of that cell, and it's made of connective tissue that's very tough and flexible. Now, you take several of these muscle fibers, okay, about 10 to 100 of them, and you put them together in a single group, and that forms a fascicle. And then a fascicle itself is surrounded by the paramysium. So each fascicle, which is made of 10 to about 100 or so muscle fibers, is surrounded by this paramysium. This is another type of membrane. This is another type of connective tissue surrounding this fascicle that once again makes the muscles flexible but yet very strong. And then you take all of your fascicles and you surround that by the epimysium. And of course the epimysium, that epi means around. And this is another type of fibrous tissue that surrounds all the fascicles. And then now, you've got the muscle fascia surrounding this, and you have your muscle, and then your muscle will taper off to go form a tendon that attaches to a bone. Now, as you know, muscles are under voluntary control, or at least the skeletal muscles are. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle are not, but skeletal muscle is. So we have what is called a motor unit. Now, a motor unit is a motor neuron. It's a special type of neuron that controls muscle contractions, and it connects to different muscle fibers, okay? Now, you can have a motor neuron attached to very few muscle fibers, and that way you'll have very fine scale movement. Or you can have a motor neuron attached to many muscle fibers, and you won't have as fine control, but you might get a large contraction where you can lift lots of weight, like your thighs. I know, yeah, that was me back in the day. Actually, that was near the end of my weightlifting career when I was still powerlifting. And of course, that was a Halloween costume. I normally don't dress like that, but that was a Halloween costume. I went as a pro wrestler or something like that. And back in those days, I actually had a little bit more on the thigh muscle because I did lots of squats and deadlifts, but that was near the end. And the point that I'm making here is like my thigh muscles, you would have one motor neuron would attach to many of these muscle fibers. So it would control like hundreds of them at once. Now, our muscles, they come in different sizes, different shapes, and they're in different areas and arrangements throughout our body. And, form and function matter, right? Form follows function. So let's take a closer look at what I mean about the different sizes and shapes of muscle. So the first one is this parallel muscle here. You have a muscle called a sartorius, and it runs right through the middle of your leg. And basically, it's strap-like. The fascicles are basically evenly spaced, and the muscle and the tendon are the same width. You also have convergent muscles, okay? And these can be triangular in shape. So they taper down to a single tendon. So a good example of this would be a pectoral muscle, right? Your pectoralis major. That muscle attaches to your breastplate and then tapers down to a single tendon, and it brings your arm forward like that. We call this convergent. You also have muscles that are pinnate. This is where the muscle fascicles basically attach to a tendon at an angle, okay, giving it a feather-like appearance. And you have muscles like in your forearm that are pinnate shape. And of course, you can have something that's unipinnate, like the flexor pollicis. That would be unipinnate. And that's where it goes to one side. You've got all the tendons on one side. And you can also have a bipinnate version, like in your rectus femoris. That is part of your quadriceps. Your quads are made up of 4 muscles, hence the name quadricep. And you've got attached to both sides of the tendon there. And then, of course, you can have multi-pinnate, where you've got several regions of fascicles, I'll step out of the way here, joined by connective tissue that form a single section there. And that would be like in your deltoid up here. We also have sphincters. These are circular muscles, and they contract, they can close or open. And basically, these surround the body openings. And, this helps us regulate or let us control when we go to the bathroom, which is a nice thing. You also have spiral muscles as well. And a spiral muscle, they will overlap each other or wrap around each other. And that's like the supinator in your forearm. Okay. And then you have a fusiform. And this is where the midsection or the belly is larger, it's thicker than the ends. So it's tapered at the ends and larger in the middle. And that would be, of course, your bicep. I'm pointing to it. You can't see any of these muscles, but that's okay. Okay, we know that all movements are caused by a muscle contraction. And many of those movements are caused by muscles attached to a bone, and that muscle contracts, it causes a movement. And so there I am. That was one of the last powerlifting competitions I was in, and I'm lifting some weight there. Those are 100-pound plates. I know, I'm reliving the good old days here. But basically, my skeletal muscles were trained so that I could lift lots of weight. It was fun competing in all those years. Muscles, we always think of them as muscles. We always think of them as being used for movement. But they can also generate heat. You know this. You work out, you start exercising, whether it's lifting weights or doing cardio, you warm up. Well, you can also make your muscles shiver. That's more or less involuntary, but if you get cold, you'll start shivering, and that can generate heat to keep you warm. Of course, that's Eric Cartman from the South Park episode Go God Go. The new Nintendo Wii was coming out in 2 weeks, and he could not wait for the Nintendo Wii, so he went and froze himself, but unfortunately froze himself for like 500 years, and it was one of the really good South Park episodes called Go God Go. Don't watch it with your kids or with your family. Okay, muscle movement, keeping us warm from shivering. We can also do facial expressions as well. So there's my happy family. We're all looking happy there, making our happy faces. And of course, that is made by all the different muscles in our face, moving, contracting around, and giving us facial expressions, which we can use for nonverbal communication. We're all happy there. And of course, we can also use muscles for excretion. We have our sphincters, which are skeletal muscle that we can use for opening and closing. Now, when we have muscles and we're doing a movement, we have what is called agonists and antagonists. So there I am bench pressing in that one competition a few years ago. Gosh, it's been like 15 years. Well, at any rate, in that competition, when you're bench pressing, your pectoral muscles would be the agonists. They are the prime movers. And if you've ever watched, a really muscular person bench press or lift weights, especially bench press like this, you'll see the lats flare out. And those lats are the antagonists. They're moving in the opposite direction, and they kind of help stabilize your upper back as well. So we also have other functional groups like synergists, and these help stabilize this and add supplemental force. And fixators also for additional stabilization. So you're doing a curl. This guy's doing a 12-ounce curl right there. You have the fixator, which would be the supraspinatus. Your agonist would be your bicep. And then if you've ever noticed, there's this muscle right in between the bicep and the tricep. That's called the brachialis. And the brachialis is a synergist muscle. And then, of course, when you're curling, your triceps are also flexing too, because they are the agonist. They are the antagonist. Now, skeletal muscles, they have what is called insertions and origins. So the origin is the anchoring point. That's where the muscle is attached. And then we have the insertion, which is the moving end. So here's a close-up view of our bicep. So our origins of the bicep brachialis there is way up here in your shoulder, and then that's the insertion, and then that's the origin. Then the insertion is down here. So when you contract this muscle, it brings your arm upward. Okay, well, that's my introduction to an overview of muscles. My next lecture will be on an overview of muscle tissue. So that's where we're going to start talking about the actual muscle fibers. Okay, until next time, which will be soon. This is Tom Kennedy Science. I'm Tom.